Do you ever wake up and think, how did I end up here? Maybe your career looks good on paper, decent title, okay salary, steady work, but inside, something feels off. It's not that you hate your job. It's just that you can't remember the last time you were excited about it. The weeks blur together. You scroll through job listings like someone looking through a window, unsure of what they're actually searching for. And you tell yourself it's probably just stress. Or maybe a phase. That everyone feels this way sometimes. But what if it's not just a phase? What if it's a signal? See, somewhere between our late 20s and mid-40s, many of us hit this strange fork in the road. You've built something, a career, a routine, maybe even a family, but that voice inside you starts whispering, is this it? Not because you're ungrateful, but because you're evolving, and the life you built in your 20s may not fit who you've become in your 30s or 40s. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. In fact, this is one of the most quietly shared experiences among people our age. We hit this invisible wall. Not a crisis exactly, but a deep sense of misalignment. You're competent, but uninspired. You're busy, but unfulfilled. You've been doing all the right things, but they no longer feel right. In this video, I want to help you begin to shift that. Not by telling you to quit your job tomorrow. Not by selling you some find your passion cliche, but by offering 4 powerful, honest questions that can help you redesign your career from the inside out, whether that means shifting roles, changing industries, or simply redefining what success means to you now. Because if you're feeling lost, stuck, or like you're going through the motions, there's a reason. And sometimes, clarity doesn't come from having the answers. It comes from asking better questions. Let's start with this one. If my 18-year-old self could see my life right now, what would they be proud of? And what would confuse them? It's a strange question, but hang with me. When we're 18, we don't know much about how the world works, but we have a sharp instinct for what we want. Maybe you dreamed of traveling, starting a business, doing work that helped people, or just not being like everyone else. And then life happened. You took the job that made sense. You followed the security. You got good at being responsible. And to be clear, there's nothing wrong with that. Choosing stability is not a failure. Being practical isn't selling out. But sometimes we get so good at surviving that we forget what it feels like to create. We forget the version of ourselves that once believed life could feel more alive, more meaningful, not just bearable. So take a breath and really think about that question. What would 18-year-old you be proud of? Your resilience, the family you've built, how you overcame something no one saw, and what would confuse them? Maybe that you stopped painting, or that you work 10 hours a day at something you don't care about, or that you've convinced yourself it's too late to change. This isn't about shame, it's about reconnecting to that compass. The part of you that knew what joy and fulfillment felt like before you got buried under expectations, bills, and fear. Let me share something personal here. A friend of mine, let's call her Mai, spent 12 years climbing the corporate ladder in a field she was objectively successful in. Solid income, a team under her, even some recognition in her industry. But she told me, I don't think I've ever loved this. I just kept getting promoted and thought that meant I was on the right path. What woke her up wasn't burnout. It was her daughter. One night, while Mai was still replying to emails at 9 p.m., her daughter came up and said, Mommy, why do you always look so tired when you come home? That hit her hard, not because it was rude, but because it was true. She realized she'd been so busy providing that she hadn't thought about whether she was actually living. So she started small. She didn't quit. She didn't blow everything up. She just asked herself one question each week. What would it look like if my work felt more aligned with who I actually am? And little by little, things started to shift. She found ways to do more mentoring, less admin. She took a course in something that sparked her curiosity again. 2 years later, she transitioned into a role that didn't look as shiny on LinkedIn, but lit her up in a way she hadn't felt in a decade. That leads me to another question you might want to sit with. Am I proud of how I spend most of my day? Forget the paycheck for a moment. Forget the performance reviews and the job titles. Just think about your day, how you spend your hours, your energy, your focus. Because your life isn't measured in years, It's measured in days. And if most of your days are spent doing something that drains you, numbs you, or leaves you feeling smaller, that's not just a work issue. That's a life issue. We often wait for some big crisis, a layoff, a health scare, a relationship breakdown, to give ourselves permission to make a change. But what if you didn't wait? What if you took the signals seriously now? That doesn't mean you have to take drastic action overnight. Redesigning your career is not about impulsive leaps. It's about honest reflection and intentional movement. Because the truth is, your career isn't just a job. It's a big part of how you contribute, grow, and find meaning in the world. And if it's not working for you, not just financially, but emotionally, mentally, and even spiritually, then it's okay to say, something needs to change. Even if you don't know what yet, even if it feels scary, even if other people don't get it, you don't owe anyone an explanation for wanting a life that feels more aligned. And the first step is asking the kind of questions that reconnect you to your own truth. Let's keep going. So let's stay with that last question for a moment. Am I proud of how I spend most of my day? I know that might feel heavy. It's the kind of question we usually avoid because we're afraid of the answer. And maybe you're already thinking, I don't have a choice. I've got bills, a mortgage, people counting on me. And you're absolutely right. You do have responsibilities. You've probably spent years, maybe decades, building a life that others depend on. That's real. That matters. But here's what also matters. You, your well-being, your energy, your peace of mind. They're not nice-to-haves. They're not things you earn only after everyone else's needs are met. They are the foundation. Because when you're running on empty, constantly stressed, quietly resentful, it spills over into your relationships, your health, your sense of self. I've seen this play out more times than I can count. People who didn't hate their jobs exactly, but hated who they became when they were in them. They snapped at their kids more often. They stopped laughing at things that used to make them smile. They got so good at pretending everything was fine that even they started to believe it. But deep down, there was that nagging discomfort, that low hum of, this isn't how I thought life would feel. And that brings us to another powerful question, one that can feel both uncomfortable and freeing. If I wasn't afraid, what would I try? Just sit with that for a second. If fear wasn't calling the shots, fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of starting over, what would you explore? Not necessarily some giant dramatic change. Maybe just a pivot, a test, a toe dipped into a different stream. Would you go back to school part-time? Start writing again? Finally pitch that business idea that's lived in your notes app for 5 years? Ask for that internal transfer? Or even just admit out loud that you want more? The truth is, fear doesn't always show up as panic. Sometimes it shows up as logic. It dresses itself up in phrases like, now's not the right time. What if I fail? What will people think? I'm too old to start over. But what if none of that were actually true? What if those weren't facts, just well-rehearsed excuses we tell ourselves to stay comfortable? A woman I know, in her late 30s, had worked in HR for over a decade. Solid income, good company, but the work never felt like a match. She had always been drawn to wellness and psychology, but she kept pushing it down, telling herself it was too late to switch lanes. Until one day, she asked herself, what would I do if I wasn't afraid of wasting time? And that shifted everything, because she realized time was passing anyway. Staying stuck wasn't saving her time, it was just using it up without anything changing. So she enrolled in an evening coaching program. It didn't pay right away. It didn't impress her LinkedIn network, but it reconnected her to herself. 2 years later, she transitioned fully into her own private practice. And even though the money didn't double overnight, her energy did. And that changed everything else. The point isn't that everyone needs to quit their job and start a new business. That's not the message here. The point is, fear should not be your career advisor. And yet, for so many of us, it is. Quietly calling the shots behind the scenes, keeping us small, keeping us safe in the most soul-suffocating way. So if you feel like your career doesn't fit you anymore, it's okay. You're not broken. You're just outgrowing an old version of yourself. And here's the next question that can open the door to real change. What does success actually mean to me now? Because let's be honest, a lot of us are chasing a definition of success we didn't even choose. We internalized it from our parents, our culture, our industry, or that voice in our head that tells us, if you're not earning six figures, managing a team, or hitting milestones, you're behind. But are you? Or are you just measuring your life with someone else's ruler? I once spoke to a guy who had been a senior manager at a global tech company, very successful by most standards, high income, travel perks, the whole thing. But he told me the loneliest moment of his life was at an award dinner when he won an internal recognition trophy and realized he didn't even care. He said, "It hit me that I was chasing someone else's dream. It was never mine." That night, he went home and started journaling for the first time in years. His first entry was a single line: "What does success look like if no one else is watching?" That question changed his life. He didn't quit right away. He didn't need to. But he started making decisions from a deeper place, one that prioritized alignment over applause. And eventually, he found himself in a role that felt like a contribution, not just an obligation. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. Success isn't a finish line. It's a feeling. It's the quiet confidence that you're building something that reflects who you really are, not just who you're expected to be. So if you're in your 30s or 40s and wondering if it's too late to make a change, let me tell you something. It's not. It's exactly the right time. Because now you have experience. You have perspective. You know what doesn't work, and that's just as valuable as knowing what does. You don't need a total reset. You just need to start asking better questions and listening to the answers, even if they're inconvenient, even if they scare you a little, even if they go against everything you thought you had to be. You're not behind. You're just beginning to listen. Let's keep going. You know, sometimes the hardest part isn't even the questions. It's what happens when the answers start to whisper back. Because once you realize that something in your life, your job, your definition of success, the pace you've been pushing yourself at, no longer fits, you can't unsee it. That knowing doesn't go away. It stays with you in quiet moments, when you're staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m., wondering if this is all there is. When you're sitting in yet another meeting that drains you. When you find yourself snapping at the people you love, not because you're angry at them, but because you're exhausted from pretending. That's why this last question matters so much, maybe more than any of the others. What kind of life am I designing, and is it one I actually want to live? It sounds big, and it is, but it's also incredibly practical, because whether we realize it or not, we're always designing our lives. Every decision, what we say yes to, what we tolerate, what we avoid, what we convince ourselves we can't change, shapes the direction we're headed in. The problem is, most of us are designing by default, not by intention. We're following tracks laid out years ago, hoping they still lead somewhere meaningful. But if you're watching this, really watching, there's a good chance that you already feel it. Something has shifted. You're ready for something more. Not necessarily more in the traditional sense, more money, more promotions, more pressure, but more alignment, more peace, more truth, more of you in your own life. And look, this isn't about having it all figured out. It's about being honest. It's about giving yourself permission to grow out of things that once made sense, to say that version of success worked for me before, but I've changed, and that's allowed. You don't owe your younger self consistency. You owe your current self honesty. And here's the thing no one tells you enough. It's okay to pivot. It's okay to change your mind. It's okay to want something different at 35 or 42 or 50 than you did at 25. Your job isn't to impress anyone. Your job is to build a life you don't feel like escaping from. Let me share one more story with you, one that still gives me chills. There was a man in his early 40s, worked in finance for nearly 2 decades. He was reliable, respected, and miserable. Not in a dramatic way, just in that slow, soul-deep kind of way that starts to erode your spirit. One morning, while dropping his son off at school, his son looked at him and said, "Dad, I don't want to have a job like yours when I grow up. You always look tired." That was the moment. Not because his son meant anything cruel, but because it hit him. He was modeling a life he wouldn't wish on the person he loved most. He didn't quit that week. He didn't run off and start a farm. He just got honest. He talked to a career coach. He started having real conversations with his wife. He took time off, not to vacation, but to reflect. He gave himself space. A year later, he shifted into a role in a completely different sector. Less money, more meaning. For the first time in years, he said, he felt like his son was proud of how he showed up in the world, and so was he. Redesigning your career isn't about escaping. It's about realigning. It's about remembering that your life is allowed to reflect your values, not just your obligations. You're not too late. You're not too behind. You're not stuck. You're just standing at a crossroads that most people never talk about, but almost everyone eventually reaches. And here's the beautiful part. You get to choose. You get to ask better questions. You get to design something new, not from panic, but from clarity. So I want to leave you with this. Not an answer, but a challenge. Take one of these 4 questions and actually sit with it this week. Write it down. Let it breathe. See what comes up without trying to fix or control the answer. Let it be messy. Let it be real. Because the life you're building is too important to live on autopilot. And if any part of this resonated with you, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. What are you questioning right now? What part of your career or life are you feeling called to reimagine? You never know who else you might encourage just by sharing. If this helped you, feel free to hit that like button or subscribe. Not for my sake, but so we can keep having honest conversations like this. Ones that meet you where you are, not where the world expects you to be. Your story isn't stuck. You're just in the middle of a powerful redesign. And trust me, the next version of your life, it can be one you're truly proud to wake up to. You've got this. If you're still here, still listening, I want to say something that might feel small, but really matters. The fact that you're even asking these kinds of questions, it means you're already braver than you think. Because most people don't ask. They bury the discomfort. They tell themselves this is just what adult life is. A little dull, a little draining, nothing you can do about it. But not you. You paused, you listened, you let yourself wonder, could this be better? And that single moment of curiosity, that flicker of maybe, is how everything begins to shift. So what now? Well, maybe you don't need to map out a 5-year plan. Maybe you just need to take one small, honest step. And that step can be really simple. It might look like sitting down with a notebook this weekend and actually writing out your answers to these questions. Unfiltered, no pressure to be smart or impressive. Just truth. It might look like calling someone you trust and saying, hey, I'm thinking about making a change, and I don't even know what that looks like yet. Can I talk it through with you? It might look like taking a course, sending an email, applying for one job that feels more you than the one you're in. Not to escape your life, but to explore what else could be possible. You don't need to change everything to change something. You just need to stop ignoring the voice inside you that already knows where you're meant to go next. Because here's what I know about people like you. People in their 30s, 40s, maybe even 50s, who have carried a lot, built a lot, survived more than they let on. You're not lost. You're just ready for something deeper. And maybe no one ever gave you permission to want that. Something more aligned, more meaningful, more you. So I'm giving it to you now. You have permission to want more, not because what you have is bad, but because you've grown. You've seen enough to know what matters and what doesn't. You've lived enough to know that a paycheck without peace is a slow kind of poverty. And you've earned the right to design a life that doesn't just look good, but feels honest, energizing, and true. That's not selfish, that's mature. Because when you're doing work that fits not just your resume, but your values, you don't just perform better, you show up better for your family, your community, yourself. So if there's one last thing I want you to take from this conversation, it's this. You're allowed to change. You're allowed to grow out of your old life. And you're allowed to build a new one that fits who you are now. Ask the questions, sit with the answers, and then take the next small, brave step. And if you ever need to be reminded that you're not alone in this, come back here, read the comments, leave your own, reach out, because there's a whole quiet community of people, maybe just like you, who are doing the same deep work. Redesigning a life takes courage, but you don't have to do it all today. You just have to start. Thanks for being here, and if this helped you, even in the smallest way, pass it on. Someone else might need this reminder too. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, You're not behind. You're just in a season of becoming.